Hello and welcome to the Poorhammer Podcast, episode 82. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
And with us today is my lovely wife. Say hello, Jen.
How's it going?
And on that note, let's get into today's topic, which is going to be a review of 10th edition, the first 3 months of it, how it's kept up with the promises it made, and see if it's actually a good way for new players to get into the game.
Sounds good. So, GW claimed quite a bit on the 10th edition being substantially better for new players specifically.
And they made a lot of other claims of what it was going to try to do versus 9th edition. And we got receipts this time. Before the episode started, I went through and listened to a bunch of Stu Black advertising.
Alternatively known as cherry picking, so that we can talk about things that we want to talk about.
To be fair, I pretty much wrote down every claim.
I think one of the first ones that was like the tagline is simplified but not simple.
Yes. The big push for 10th edition was to try to remove 9th edition's bloat, to streamline the game a bit, to make it less obtuse to new people, and see if they couldn't grow that audience a bit.
Which is definitely a worthy goal to have in mind.
But the question is, did they succeed? Let's actually start by framing our opinions, where we are in 10th edition, and where we come from outside of it.
Okay.
So, you and I played for all of 9th. Well, I played for all of 9th. You played for the vast majority of 9th.
Yeah.
My wife here played 2 games of 9th, if I remember right.
I played 1.5 games of 9th.
And for 10th edition, it's been about 12 weeks now. I've got a bit over a dozen games under my belt, but probably less than 20. I've been trying to jam extra hard to have info for the podcast so I can come from a knowledgeable standpoint without killing myself when I'm already working all day. Eric's a bit behind me on that.
I am. I'm probably closer to 10.
And then my wife here.
I have 4. 1 was in person and the other 3 were on Tabletop Simulator.
So you played with one of our buddies at my brother's house. Rip basement. And then you joined for the TTS league the patrons ran as a learning league where they were trying to get a bunch of people who were new to the game to play together over a few weeks and learn how to play. Eric and I guest starred and had our hilarious on-stream failure where we tried to play and a power outage killed us on round 2.
That was fantastic. I mean, it was kind of fun, but...
We actually got a lot of games with new people because we played with all of the new patrons in that league. So it was very interesting to interview my opponents after I finished each match to figure out what they liked and what they didn't. And our silent editor from up above played in the Learning League as well for his first ever games of 40K.
I'm pretty sure Brazil's down below.
I'm just talking about the fact that he is above us in the hearts of the fans.
Ah, okay.
Also, who says north is up, Eric? That's a really Central European, Northern Hemisphere type thought process.
Yeah, it is. Northern Hemisphere for the win. Fucking Australians.
Those fucking upside down bastards. Their shrimps and their Barbies. I'm sorry, prawns.
And their backwards toilets. Fucking water going in the wrong direction. What the hell?
Because the water knows it's supposed to be going down and it's trying.
Oh, God.
All right, so into the topic itself, there are a lot of claims. The number one was simplified, not simple. I have the direct quote to my knowledge, or at least paraphrased close to it from Stu Black himself. If you're experienced, there's loads of nuance still. If you're a new player, it's an easier on-ramp to get into.
And I do think that we need to break it down further into like its subsections to actually examine, but I don't think they failed.
This is where we get into the clickbait. Did it fail at its goals? And it's like, no, it didn't fail. It's a complicated answer. It didn't pull off a 10 out of 10.
But it also wasn't a 1 out of 10. It is a step forward and good progress on the overall goal, but there's still work to be done.
And I'd argue there's not a right answer either. Because the idea of simplified, not simple, and keeping nuance but making it easy to understand, these are counterintuitive points. It is going to be a hard balancing act to get right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like these are taglines, so it's encapsulating so much beyond just like one thing. But it's nice to be able to say that they at least didn't fail.
It would actually be hard to fail completely too, though. They would have to have rules bloat and splat books right away, and they're too slow to release to truly have failed.
I mean, I can definitely think of some ways that they could have, but I'm not gonna give ideas just in case.
Let's not step backwards.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to probably answer this one over the course of the episode. I don't think it's like a easy, here's what we liked, here's what we didn't. I will say, for an opening statement from you, Jen, what do you think of 10th edition being an easy on-ramp? How was it complexity-wise?
Complexity-wise, I have played more complicated games. I have played simpler games. So it wasn't the worst thing I've ever attempted to learn and play. It's not the easiest.
So you did play a couple games of 9th, and one of them was like a very trimmed down kind of tutorial or whatever. But thoughts on the comparison of like the original when Brad was trying to teach you 9th and now when you actually have kind of learned 10th?
It was definitely easier to learn 10th. I don't know if it's because I made an effort to play a bunch of games right away versus 9th, where I played like 1.5 and then we didn't really I didn't make it a point to play games every week, but it did seem like things were clearer and things made sense when you actually start playing. The stuff that you are looking at and doing makes sense.
Right. So like the actual like gameplay itself wasn't one of these like, okay, let's go reference the rule book, these 8 pages, and figure out what the hell is supposed to happen.
Because I am not like a pro player, there were a couple of times where like I had to look stuff up because I didn't know what it means. But once you see it enough times, it starts to make sense, and then you don't have to look it up every time.
How's Blast work?
For every 5 models in a unit, you get an extra attack dice for each model you're attacking with.
Hey, you did it. Universal rules, they work. Although Blast kind of existed last edition. But we'll pretend that it didn't.
I mean, I think that's a good thing to bring up is the universal rules of those Blast, Twin Linked. It's a complexity that's kind of hidden from the data sheets, but once you play with the same special rules, you kind of intuitively understand what they're trying to do.
Okay, so let's start getting into some of the specifics rather than talk broadly here. Let's start with data sheets. So one of the big things they were bragging about is the change from 9th edition to 10th was data sheets becoming your, in quotes, one-stop shop for most rules. I think they nailed that. It's very rare I have to leave a data sheet to check something that is not a stratagem.
Or an army rule.
Sure. It's basically your army rule, your detachment rule, and a stratagem you could be applying. Or I guess an enhancement if it's a character.
Yeah.
But even in like the 40K app, which I think has the worst layout for the enhancements for the character, you can still just click the character and then click the enhancement drop down and read it.
Yeah, it's not too difficult to have it as really part of the data sheet.
Yeah, so I would say it's really just the stratagems and I guess your detachment or army rule.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's still some further refinement that can be made, especially in how leaders actually get attached to data sheets.
Yes, please.
Because there's the leaders giving it the thing, but that data sheet doesn't have the thing, so...
Yeah.
That data sheet is at the top of my list of data sheets, but the unit it's attached to is at the bottom of my list of data sheets, so...
Yeah, that is a separate bullet point on my list, and that is one that I want to talk about in detail as leaders.
I guess in part that is an issue with what you're using to build your lists. If I had saved them as like pictures, I could have rearranged the pictures or whatever and put them together, but the tool that I was using just lists them.
Hey, GW sells a $40 solution to that problem that was outdated by the time it hit store shelves.
Yes, well, I suppose, but...
You could have paid $40 to have misprinted things.
I mean, I could just try to print something on the printer.
That's true.
I think that one is one of those, in simplifying it, it's actually hidden some of the interactions and made it more difficult during play to quickly look them up.
Yes, but I do want to say we're into leaders now, not data sheets.
Right, and that's the thing is like data sheets as a whole, they did a good job, but because of how they're laid out, there are some shortcomings.
My double-edged sword for data sheets Something I know a couple of new people talked about during the league we played was they felt like they had to learn a specific rule for every data sheet in the game.
Yeah.
And while that's not true, there is a lot of repeat rules. I get the complaint from them for that being a complexity, but at the same time, on the simplified, not simple, I think that's one of the big boons of the edition, is that every unit feels unique within an army. In most cases, there have been failures, but by and large.
And I think that is one of the ones that we'll bring up later about like the unit does a thing that it's supposed to do. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, it does a thing. It's not this like hidden, oh, I equipped it with this, and that, and now it does something different. Haha. It does make it so that each data sheet is like, okay, this is what it does. It looks like it should do that. I'm on board.
Yeah, so that gets into the problem of stacking buffs. So one of the things Stu Black was advertising is a unit should do what it looks like it can do, cutting away the ability to stack a bunch of buffs to make something unexpectedly strong compared to how it looks on the table. His argument for this was to avoid gotcha moments, to which I say they did fail.
I think it's a reasonable attempt. I can understand how looking at 10th, the rules and the indexes and all that stuff, you can go, yeah, that could make sense. But in practice, in actual play, there's still a good amount of problems. In general, you can look at it and go, yeah, it's probably okay, but there's still a decent amount of hidden because of leaders.
I don't even think it's leaders. So their argument was by making it so you couldn't stack a warlord trait, a relic, an aura, and a stratagem, right? That was his example one.
Yeah.
You can still stack an enhancement, a stratagem, and there are still auras, which we'll get to.
Right. And then there's the ability on the data sheet.
Yes, and that one is the sticking point to me. Because, Jen, from the Learning League, how many times did you have to explain the Carnifex ability?
So my thoughts on this are more of like the game as a whole and like me as a person, right? So if I was playing with you guys in the basement and you started pulling random numbers out, I'd be like, whoa, stop. What are you doing? You're going to have to walk me through it. When I'm playing with people that I don't really know and I don't super know the game, I'm less inclined to argue with somebody about like, well, what are you doing and why all of a sudden did all of your numbers like double when I don't understand what you're doing, but I'm not really going to argue with you about it either. So
you're too new to feel confident in arguing that point.
Yeah, well, and like partially, you know, it's like, yeah, I'm too new, and then you're like trying to like call somebody over to teach you, and now you're not really playing a game, now you're playing a teaching class kind of thing.
And you're trying to learn your own shit still to a certain point, like focus on that.
Yeah, so as a whole, if you both players sat down at the beginning of the game and like really actually explained like, this is my dude and this is what he can do, maybe that would help. But I think in every one of my games, I did warn people like, hey, if you shoot my Carnifexes, they can move towards you. Heads up. But again, it's like, well, I was telling people because I don't want to be like that person who's like, surprise Carnifex. But yeah, but like there were times where people were like, I'm going to do a thing with my dude that I'm like, I don't know your dude could do that because I played against 2 armies in this whole thing. So I played against 3 now. And so it's like, I don't know what your army can do. So I can't say, I mean, you could have made something up, but I would have been like, yeah, sure, whatever.
If they're an Eldar player, they can make something up and be right.
Yeah, that's about right. It's difficult because, yeah, they kind of failed on this topic, but I don't hate that in a weird way.
I dislike certain things we lost for the argument of avoiding gotchas when gotchas were clearly not avoided.
That's true. Yeah.
And we could argue there are specific stacking buff failures where, like, some of the top armies are really good at stacking buffs right now, which you could say is a miss on balance more than the design of the edition, where those are the outlying problem.
Yeah.
Now, that gets into my thing of, like, as a more experienced person, stacking buffs and giving myself a minor headache is where the fun of the game is. I love the complicated interactions I can make. I love making a unit that's, like, super terrible suddenly jump tons of mortal wounds, or suddenly hit way above its class, being able to get like AP3 out of nowhere. Stuff like that is really fun to discover. It's where that it tickles that inner Johnny in you, right?
Absolutely.
And we've lost a lot of that, and a lot of people are unhappy with the areas where we haven't lost it yet, which is very disappointing to me, as when we get into the overall thoughts on Simplified, Not Simple, I feel like we've gone too far in some places, and there's a lot of cries for more of that, and I really don't want to be paying $600 a box to play checkers.
I'm with you. I do enjoy the complex nature that you can put together, but I understand that there are some obvious gotcha type things where it's like you look at a little, just a little troop, and after stacking all of these things together, it just deletes tanks, and you're like, well, the fuck just happened? How? What? That's not how it's supposed to work. So like there's some understanding of like you look at a model and you go, okay, that's a Carnifex. Probably pretty scary. Might need to look about and see what it can do. But it's tough. I don't know, man.
I think part of the problem is that because every army has its own set of rules to it, I don't have to know just what my army does, but if I don't want to be surprised, I have to know what my opponent's army does. And so now I'm trying to learn 2 armies.
And boy, oh boy, does that get into a problem that isn't in this review of the Indexhammer portion of the edition, but is going to become a problem later.
Yeah, but it's still kind of a problem because like if you're new, like Jen, you were still learning how to play Tyranids in 10th edition.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could tell me anything and I would have said, yeah, sure.
Ignoring how to play against the opponent, trying to figure out how they're playing their army. And it's just like, that's always going to exist. So long as the game is still unique to like actually have different data sheets and stuff like that. But it does mean that there's just that complexity that's going to exist.
To move on from that, let's step away from that claim and move into like a positive, something I think they really did well, which is universal special rules and how they actually manage the simplified, not simple, in my opinion.
I have only one issue with them. They need to provide a single page PDF that says, here's the special rule, here's what it does. All of them. No pictures, no fluff. I don't need any of that shit. I need just one page.
There is a 4-page quick start guide that includes that on one of the pages. I don't think it's the best version of that. I think a fan-made one is still better. But yeah, I get your complaint there of in the core rulebook, it takes up like 3 pages and it's awkward because some of them are in a different location than other ones because they're for a different phase.
Yeah, which there is some understanding of how it is laid out once I look at it, but I'm just like, that's just wrong for once I'm in the game taking a quick reference look. So that's my one issue is like the way that they presented the rules I don't like. But the rules themselves, I'm all for it. Let's keep that.
Yeah, we could argue balance of them and how they were pointed. Obviously, Dev Wounds was treated as a peer to lethal hits and sustained hits, when math-wise it is provably better than both at all times. But that's a balance issue. The idea of universal special rules, I think, is a 10 out of 10 that's worked. The fact that I can say you've got lethal hits and there's a good chance, Jen, do you remember what that one is?
Critical attacks always wound.
Nailed it. And I can say feel no pain.
Yeah, these get a little bit weird because there's the invul and there's the feel no pain. So the invul is you don't take the wound to begin with. And if you do take the wound, then the feel no pain is never mind, actually, no, you don't.
Yes, it's shrugging it off. An invuln is like a ceiling to a save.
Yeah, it's just like it's weird that they're like...
It's saying your save can never get worse than this. Asterisk. As with all rules.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that it's like... When you're trying to learn all of these keywords, you're like, why are these different keywords?
But the key thing is you remembered them all.
Or at least enough to be like, oh, that's roughly what it does. Maybe I have to take a look and see the specifics, but...
Yeah, like if you told me, like, does this affect that? I probably would be like, I don't know, but...
But in 9th edition, that would have been every army would have a different name for Feel No Pain. That was the case.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, I like the keywords because when my opponent says, like, oh, these are blast or oh, these are twin linked, I know why he's just, like, adding dice to his table.
I think that is a large reason why a unit should look like it does what it can do, has some hints to it of, like, we all understand what twin linked is. That unit, it's got twin linked. Okay, understood. Continue on.
Another one, this one bothered me because it was a claim that they made multiple times. Stratagems will be high impact. They're either reaction moments or cinematic big one-off abilities, and that one is bull.
So here's my hot take. I didn't use stratagems in any of my 4 games.
You did. You used a couple of them because you used Overwatch. UCP rerolled.
Oh, I did use that.
The core strats are all there, and they tank shock is neat, but not the specifics. Yeah.
Let's save the core stratagems for, I want to do them later in the episode when I can rant properly. But I think the stratagems being high impact is just, it's such a lie. It depends on the index, and you could argue that maybe some of the indexes are misses, but there's a lot of them that you can just ignore in most of the indexes.
The problem with this is like they're either reactions or cinematic one-offs, and it's like, I mean, there's a decent number of them that cinematic I could see being kind of neat, but as the strategy game aspect, no. There are still useful stratagems. I absolutely still use them. I'm happy to have a CP generation so that I can use them more often, but they're not this.
And certain indexes will still combo, like 3 useful stratagems in a row. And then other ones will have a spammable stratagem. Armor of Contempt variants are all very good. The anti-Armor of Contempt, I still haven't found a clever name for yet.
There's also the ones that are like, you can use this same stratagem on something else for 0. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there's good ones. But there's ones like the AdMech character on 1 in 400 chance deals 1 mortal wound for a CP. Why is this a stratagem? I used it so I could say I used it. I went out of my way to waste it on a game so that I could say I have tried it. It sucks. I knew it sucked. Everyone knew it sucked. Anyone who can read knows that stratagem should not have been written. It was, for some reason.
Yeah.
And it's not alone. It's just a great example of that, of like, they're sprinkled everywhere.
I think that is the real problem I have with it is previously in 9th, we had a bunch of those fluffy strats that are like, put that in Crusade.
Yeah. Vengeance for Prospero, Prospero Burns, all of those.
All of that type of thing. When they said stratagems are going to be high impact and they're going to do this thing, I was like, oh, so they're getting rid of those fluffy ones and we're going to get like, this changes the game state. It does something for all of them. And maybe technically you could argue that, but as an opinion, I'm going to say no, they failed.
It could be argued. We only have 1 detachment for everybody. First revs, blah, blah, blah. I still count it as a failure.
I would love to be proven wrong when all the codexes come out and we look at them and go, oh, yeah, okay, no, fucking nailed it.
Yeah,
but,
and we'll have 3 seconds to do that episode before 11th edition starts.
Exactly. So, I don't know, man.
Okay, so to counter that, here's one that did work. At the table, having less rules paralysis for looking for the right stratagem, etc., but not limited feeling when you're building your list. Obviously, we have to hold off and put a pin in it until codexes start coming out, because currently with the index, you're not even choosing your detachment.
Right.
But I will say a lot of people, when we were playing in the league, I saw a lot less of the sitting there staring at your 35 stratagems, knowing that they're all trash, and praying that one of them you misread and is good.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear, Jen, what your thoughts are on like the rules paralysis type thing during gameplay.
My biggest hang up was doing math. I know it's basic math, but it was like I don't know why. It's just like you're sitting there and you're like, I totally know what 6 minus 3 is, but I can't do that right now, and it was just a me thing.
It's because you're thinking about other things. You're trying to focus on the strategy and all of that. Makes perfect sense.
How you're going to score both secondaries and stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of things still going on.
Yeah.
But in terms of like rules, it wasn't too bad. I mean, again, I didn't really get into the stratagems. I used Overwatch kind of on a fluke. My opponent did it to me first, and I went, oh, hey, I can do that too. So here we are.
And yours was better.
Mine was better.
How's
but
the turnaround?
That's because I had Torrent and he didn't, so.
The new players discovering that Torrent and Overwatch work the way you want them to is a great moment in every new player's career. And then it's like, there's that like wave up and down of, oh my god, Overwatch sucks. Oh my god, Overwatch with Torrent is broken. This has to get nerfed. Oh my god, never mind. I realized that I can stay outside of 12 inches before doing stuff.
At first, like the first couple of games, because I'm trying to put together all of the pieces, it was a little bit, I don't want to say like full paralysis, but it was a little bit harder. But then like the more games you play, I didn't have to look every single thing up all the time, and it was easier to do.
I think that that's really where I think they succeeded in, once you're sort of familiar with it and you have the universal special rules kind of understood, you're able to more properly focus on the strategy of the battle, the secondaries, the primaries, that type of like, this is a strategy game. How do I do things instead of how do I accomplish a thing I want to do.
And a key part of it to me is you don't feel the regret 2 days later when you're reading your rules and going, oh shit, I had this the whole time.
Yeah.
That was the feel bad in ninth that occurred many times when someone would realize 2 days later, oh, I had this stratagem, why didn't I think about it? Oh, I could have used in the special version of the detachment I was running that was in the supplement, there's the extra 6 stratagems I didn't even look at.
Yeah, and I mean, it was so common to a point that it just became like the normal. There's always going to be in a strategy type thing that you look back and you go, probably could have done something better. But in ninth, it was always like, oh, that was dumb.
I couldn't read enough words before I had to give up.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think they have done a pretty good job. But again, we're still on all the indexes. So we'll see, because right now, building the list is a little limited.
Yeah, and it's worth noting to everyone in our audience, over the weekend, you all get to see the Tyranid Codex. We're not special children who got it early and have read it yet. So we'll find out with you after we've recorded this.
Yeah, and somehow Brad didn't find it falling off of a truck somewhere.
I can do that, but it will be after everyone has read it from previews.
Yeah.
That trick's different. So, do we want to get into the big one for you and me, Eric, that I know half our audience is waiting for?
Yeah, but I think before we get into that, I'd like to talk about something sort of tangential to the rules paralysis type thing, and that's just like how the back and forth with your opponent actually works.
Okay, so let's have Jen do this one, because I know she has strong opinions on this.
So first, Eric was so incredibly close to saying, I want to talk about your car's extended warranty, and he didn't take it. So for me as a person, when my opponent is taking their turn and you can tell that they're trying to like put all the pieces together and do math, I don't want to just like stare at you, which like when I'm playing online, obviously I can't just stare at you, which is easier. But like I don't want to just stare at you while you're doing math, right?
Yeah, we've been married for years, so you really don't want to look anymore.
That's a different discussion.
Wow. Getting real here. Gonna do marriage counseling with Poorhammer.
All right, so you're cooking dinner tomorrow. Continue.
But at the same time, my default mode is to like, let me check my phone. But I don't want you to think that I'm not interested in what's happening in the game, because now I'm like on my phone and like checking my email or whatever. But like, I don't want to stare at you, and I don't want to just stare at my phone. And then it's just like, what am I supposed to be doing? Because like Brad is pretty fast at it when he's doing the math, because he's played a lot and he knows all the rules and he knows what's going on. But like when I'm doing it, it's almost like, hang on, I got to get out some paper because I can't keep all this straight. So it's like, I don't want people to think that I'm not interested in the game, but I also don't have anything to do.
Yeah.
That's a key thing that I think they failed at.
There's a lot of like, your opponent is rolling dice, your opponent is rolling dice, your opponent is rolling dice. And obviously all of these attacks are not going through, all of these things are missing, but generally you don't sit there and you go, okay, I missed, like you generally say, okay, I'm shooting with the heavy plasma cannon. You roll the dice, nothing happens, you move on. You don't sit there and like explain it step by step, like, because everyone knows what's happening. But so then when you're doing like a whole bunch of weapons at once, you're rolling a whole lot of dice, and if none of those land, you're just like, okay, well, I just rolled 40 dice for 5 minutes. What are you doing?
I felt so bad about doing that as orcs. So it's like, I've got to shoot. I've got to do it. But ain't nothing happening here. So back with you in 5 minutes.
In my game against orcs, we were playing on Tabletop Simulator, but if you told me his dice were loaded, I would have believed you. I have never seen that many sixes before in my life. I'm like, how? That doesn't even make sense. You have to do 5 saves and you got all 6s? Like, how does that make sense?
That happened to me on my third game in the league, and it's a great memorable moment. It's why dice games are fun. How did you roll 14 of those in a row? Or how did I fail 18 4-ups?
Why does every psychic test fail?
It's so like, yeah, there's a lot of like, I'm going to sit and wait for you to maybe tell me something happened. Or I'm going to sit and wait for you to measure how far out 8 inches is, because now you got to push all your models around. And I play Tyranids, so you're going to have to give me a minute while I untangle all of my models to move them 8 inches. And it's like,
playing in a friend group is always easier for stuff like that versus playing versus strangers. It's part of the reason, the very complicated, multifaceted reason of why competitive is a pain in the ass.
Right. So it's like, I don't want to sit here and have to double check everything you're doing and like just stare at you and like, but I also I don't want to stare at the wall.
Start scrolling Twitter and be like, I'm obviously not paying attention because there ain't shit I'm doing. So
then it feels bad for your opponent. They're like, you're not even paying attention. I need them to do something. How do I get them to pay attention? It's just...
That is one of the problems I have with playing online games that are designed for table.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's real bad, yeah.
It's one of those where it's like on the table, we can walk around, we can shoot the shit, look at some of your models, just kind of like do stuff.
When we're at the table, it's never just the two of us.
Yeah.
When we're at the table, there's usually two other people painting at one table over, chit-chatting with you while you're playing.
Exactly. There's banter going on, and it really is more of this, like, you don't have to just stare at the person kind of thing. Like, you can have this interaction.
On the flip side, one of the games I played online, we had quite a few people spectating. We were all in the chat room together, and it's like, I know you guys aren't trying to do anything, but I need to tell somebody something, and I don't have a physical way to be, I need you all to stop, you know? So it's harder to indicate, like, I need you to do a thing now.
That gets into the opposite issue, which is, I know the game you're talking about. It was your first game in the league.
It was. And I know that everyone's having a good time and people are talking and you're not playing. So you're like, I don't care what's going on. And it's like, you don't want to put yourself in a separate chat room, but also, hey, I need y'all to stop so I can do math.
Yeah, I was trying to help with the rules because we had 2 new players, but because I'm in there and it's a public channel, we've got 40 other people joining to hang out, and then you've got our lovely editor Cactar shows up and starts trying to talk to me about Path of Exile, and I'm like, bro, we're in the middle of a game right now. We'll talk later.
Cactar is still in trouble, so...
Good. Keep that on air. It's on the record.
I mean, it is one of those that, like, in person, those types of things work out better because it's easier to indicate, hey, chill for a minute. I gotta focus for just, like, a minute. Everybody else, go on pause.
Back to the main point of sitting around waiting. This one gets into a point that I have a lot of interest in. Before 10th edition, when we were debating doing the 40K verse one-page rules. One-page rules had leaders and attaching leaders to units and a whole bunch of other stuff that 40K took specifically to snipe one-page rules out of being relevant. One of the only things they didn't take was one of the things I was most interested in. One-page rules uses the alternating activations. So both players play the same turn together, and every time you do something, you choose one unit. Then your opponent chooses one unit. Then you choose one other unit, back and forth until every unit has been chosen. And then the turn is over, and you both move to turn 2 together.
So I like this because this is my second problem with the game, is that at the end of your command phase, you score your points, right? So essentially, at the end of your opponent's turn, you score points. So for me, it's like I'm scoring points and I haven't had a chance to do anything yet.
That's by design.
But it's frustrating when it's like, I know I can't put these models on a point because then they're too close to other units and my Tyranids can't get into melee combat. They won't live the turn anyway. But so now I can't take this point because they won't live the turn. So it's like I'm getting judged on like how well you killed my stuff last turn.
You're getting to an interesting thing about, this is very common in a lot of war games from everything I've heard. And it's a thing that I know military weirdos always get into about war games. War games, being a game, often tokenize a unit. So I see a unit as a way to sacrifice it to score victory points.
Yep.
Real war nerds will point out that when there's ethics of human life on the line, you don't actually do that. And so your problem is you hate the idea that your unit, you know you're sacrificing that unit to score 5 points and it feels bad.
But I can't even guarantee I'm going to get those 5 points because I'm going to move it and my turn, you score your points, you kill my dudes, so what was the point?
It is one of those, like, after you've done your thing, because you did your whole army, the opponent then has their whole army to deal with what you've done. That's the balance.
And I get that it's like an interesting idea, but it's also kind of frustrating.
Yes, it's counterintuitive to how you want to be trying to score points.
It's frustrating because you're playing so far out that it's almost like I just don't like where it's placed.
There's a certain point where you're basically just playing yourself.
Yes.
Just because you're like, oh, if I do this and they'll do that and then I'll do this. And
I'm playing 4D chess with myself and my opponent is,
This gets into a whole thing that newer players aren't aware of called talking it out. Newer players tend to play all 5 rounds, which is a miserable slog. The Learning League, by the way, was all at 1K points. They did not play at 2,000 points during that league, which is good, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons.
Do you know how long that game would have been?
Yes, exactly.
It would have been so long.
But one of the major things is when Eric and I play against each other, almost always by the end of turn 3, we know the outcome of the game to the point. And very often by the end of turn 2, we have a pretty good feeling and can speedrun turn 3. When you're new, you don't have that yet. You aren't thinking 3 turns ahead yet. You're not internalizing the math of how everything interacts. You can't look at a board state and see what it will look like 2 turns from now.
it's not that we're doing the math.
It's that we don't need to do the math.
It's just we've done it enough before that it's like, okay, roughly this is what the outcome's going to be. I can bank on that and ignore that little section.
If you've seen the sun rise your entire life, you don't have to sit there and wait and watch it. You know it's gonna happen. The grots are going to die.
So back to the back and forth thing, I agree. I was disappointed to see that they didn't take that same, like, here's a unit, then that's a unit.
Yeah, alternating activations is one of the things I was shocked was not in 10th. And it's one of the things I'm interested, it's like one of the things I'm most interested in hearing from the 40K studio. If they tried it and if they found issues with it where they're like, in practice, here's the problems it had and why we decided not to do the gamble. That would be super interesting. But I know from a sales pitch standpoint, you don't want to admit to that because then people will take the easy out of, well, they were just too lazy to change it over. If they had done that, the game would be perfect and it would have solved all my problems somehow.
And then there's also the fact that, like, you said it once, that means you can't ever change it in the
yes,
future.
And then you want to try it next edition and finally do the gamble, and now you've said that there were problems with it and everyone will hate it in advance. Yeah, you can't win.
I do think that, at least with 40K and how the victory point conditions, primary, secondary, that whole thing of how you actually win could be problematic for the system of I move a unit, you move a unit, given the disparity between different armies' unit point value type thing. Like, I've got 12 units, you've got 3.
Yeah, MSU versus Horde, stuff like that.
And that can be one of those where, like, yeah, their point value, offense, defense, yeah, it's working out, but that's not actually how we're winning the game. There's objectives that are being the thing to do. And when you just have more units to move around, it just gives you more. So I can understand why it's problematic, but, you know, it really, I don't think that they've changed the amount of interaction on your opponent's turn.
So that leads into the big point. One of the main arguments was we wanted to minimize the time you're not interacting with your opponent for removing Psychic, gutting it, and making it feel like dog shit.
Yeah, because some armies don't have anything to interact with Psychic, which absolutely true.
And we could argue there's a problem with 40K as a setting for Psychic and why it works in AOS and not 40K.
There's all kinds of intricacies on this, but fundamentally, Psychic in 9th felt like you were doing warp shenanigans.
You were casting spells. I had an army of wizards. You had an army of holy paladins. It felt fucking amazing. That specific matchup was hell on earth of countering each other's magic. It's fun on occasion, but no one wants to play mono blue control versus mono blue control every round of a tournament. You get very bored of playing incredibly intricate, constantly interacting with your opponent games, as much as people think that sounds great.
It is great every once in a while as like this, oh, that was fun, wasn't it? Let's not do it for another 2 months. But 10th edition, I haven't played Thousand Suns.
So Thousand Suns, we're bribed. We're a bad example.
You guys actually kind of have Psychic, but everybody else, it's not Psychic.
For most armies, it is literally I cast gun.
Even the non-gun abilities. Like I was playing Orcs and I've got Weird Boy Teleporty.
The jump.
The jump, yeah.
And I think the Weird Boy is the best example in the game of what a wizard should look like. They got the best psyker. That data sheet is the closest to what was right.
And it still didn't feel right. And that's why I was like, oh, I want to play this. But it still was like, yeah, it's okay. But there's just something missing. Partially, I'm sure it's because I knew what happened in 9th. I knew what options I had. I knew that there was all these spells. And if I didn't have that knowledge, maybe I would think that like the Weird Boy's ability was good and felt right. But I do have the experience of 9th. And right now, Psychic is not casting spells.
It's awful. So one of the things for this edition, while we were playing the early part of the edition, I have more games played as Space Marines than as Thousand Suns in 10th. The reason is show related. I have to understand every army in the game so that I can give people advice and not be an idiot. So I get to play my armies less early on so that now I can go enjoy my armies and be able to still somewhat competently give advice to someone who is at least new. I can't give super expert advice. If you want to learn something deep about Grey Knights, don't ask me, ask Eric, or go to One Last Blade.
And this edition, don't ask me, because I stopped playing them. Not because they're bad. I would be fine if they were just a bad army. That would be okay with me. It's just not spell paladins.
They were a bad army for most of 9th edition. You played them every week.
It's disappointing because I was hoping that, like, okay, they got rid of Psychic Phase, but like, hey, there's still going to be Psychic stuff, and it's not just going to be guy with a gun. It is, though. And they failed at it. I hope that Codices fucking bring it back, but I'm pretty far away from the Grey Knight Codex, so not looking forward to playing those anytime soon.
Yeah. Having played around with several armies now, Thousand Suns got bribed. I called it when I saw our rules, and I was like, these look pretty good. I'm okay. I could deal. And then we saw all the indexes finally drop, and I was like, oh, we're alone.
Yeah.
Nobody else has spells. My Tzeentch demons don't have any magic. They're the magic god's shards, and they don't have magic.
Maybe Codexes can do something similar to what Thousand Suns got, but Codexes aren't happening tomorrow.
And I would say the hope for Tyranids is in one of the revealed detachments is going to be the Psychic detachment, where it's focused on brain bugs. Maybe something happens there.
My brain bugs have lasers.
I know, but like, if the detachment was like my Thousand Suns ability where I get Cabal points and I get to actually have a spell list, if you get something similar to that in your brain bug detachment, then maybe there's some hope for other armies to get like the Band-Aid that's not really great, but at least it's better than nothing.
But it still kind of sort of feels right. And I think that that's really the biggest problem for me is how it feels. Taking a step back from just like analytically what's the most balanced. I don't play Psychic things for the most balanced. I'll be honest. I play it because it's fun.
And that gets into the main argument they had at the beginning, which was, this was a quote from Stu Black, the Psychic phase was a real downer for people whose armies don't interact with it, so it was removed.
But what about the armies that are Psychic armies?
I'm like, okay, so are we removing the fighting phase so that Tau doesn't feel like shit?
Yeah, right.
They can't interact with the fighting phase. What are they gonna do? Fucking throw a punch?
Yeah, let's get rid of the shooting phase so that sisters can just charge up the board.
It's the wrong solution to a problem. The problem was boredom from non-interactive rules. The solution was not to kill a portion of the game. It was to figure out how to make interactive rules.
I will say, at this point, the idea of adding another phase into the game, not real keen on that. These games take forever anyway, but...
All of your guys who cast gun wouldn't have cast gun anymore. Your brain bugs wouldn't shoot anymore. They never had guns before.
Well, but all the Grey Knights still have guns.
Yeah.
So you're still doing all of the steps. You're not going to skip a step. You're just going to maybe adjust it, but you're still adding.
Yeah.
Which I understand. You lost something that was very important, and now your armies feel weird, and that sucks. But also, like, I would say they should add it back, but they do need to find a way to kind of, like, condense some of this down.
I absolutely understand.
Because I was only playing 1K and it took forever to do turns. Ignoring the whole like, now your opponent is like reading Twitter or whatever. It takes forever to do a turn and I was just 1K worth of units. You guys can stop at like turn 3 and you don't play the whole thing out. But like for people who are going to play the whole thing out, that's your day. Like pack a lunch.
It is. It really is.
One of my arguments is the game shouldn't be played at 2K. Rules should have been balanced around a lower point value and games should have been smaller. If you're trying to simplify the game, but not make it overly simplistic, reducing the size. It is a exponential curve of complexity the more points you have access to stack buffs and do all these things that people complained about. The problem was 2K point games. The problem with that is they want to sell you a fuckload of overpriced plastic,
And there's also the problem of the elite, the like really elite armies. If you're trying to do 1K.
That's why I say 1K and not 500.
Yeah. I mean, even 1K for knights is like,
Well, that gets into the whole argument a lot of people have of
knights.
But
it is one of those where it's like one of the biggest things that's difficult is taking away. Like, they took away Psychic. It feels bad. I don't like it. Maybe they were right to do something to try and fix the problems that Psychic had, but they took something away from me and I don't like it. So if you're going to take away somebody's, I was always playing 2K, I have my 2K army. Well, now you only get 1,500 points.
Which is funny because, to remind you of something that's before our time, it used to be 1,500 points. They changed it to 2K to sell more models.
Right.
With the argument of people want to play with their massive collections they've built over 30 years. And the real reason is we want to sell more plastic, and if everyone suddenly needs 500 more points to play the game, fork it over.
Right. But now that we're at 2K as the standard, dropping it down, it's difficult.
I have to say, at 2K, same point value, right?
Yeah.
AOS brings only what is essentially a 1,200 point army in 40K. Like, if you break down what a unit is, what it does, and all that, the games are much smaller.
It's definitely smaller. It's somewhere around 1,200-1,500, depending on how things play out.
Depending on who you compare it to in 40K and how you interpret things, yes.
Yeah.
But that is a full episode topic we're not getting into today. But that is my hot take of how a problem should have actually been solved.
Yeah. So I guess we can rattle off a few more of the...
Yeah, there's a lot of points to go through. Okay, so there was a ton of changes, a ton of claims they made, and some of them they did good on, some they did bad on. These are ones that are less deep than the initial interview big talking points.
Right.
So we talked about leaders for the most part and how they're not greatly implemented. I think the question is leaders better than old captains and characters and auras and putting...
I actually really like it.
I'm really mixed.
There are some problems with it and the design, but it really does feel more like... So, orcs. I've got a boss that's leading some boys, and it feels like it, instead of, there's just some boys running around behind them.
I totally get that angle of it. You're right.
It's, wow, this is the leader of some units, and they're charging in together, and they're being awesome. And then all the boys died. Well, boss is still there. So, like, it feels better. It's more interesting. I think there's going to be more interest for the Crusade, like, narrative kind of campaign.
That's true. We haven't seen a codex yet to see like how that's going to deepen in any way.
I'm excited to see how that works because it feels more like it's a leader instead of, oh, it's a special dude that's just fucking off on his own.
I have some extra thoughts on it. I like the idea of more characters feeling like your units are more unique by having extra leaders attached to stuff. I worry that long term, over the edition, we'll reach a point where people realize that a 100 point unit with a 100 point character is usually not going to be better than two 100 point units without the buff.
Yeah.
Unless your character literally doubles the damage output of your unit. And that, I fear, is going to end up in a state where, like, we go from troop tax to character tax, where people don't want to take them at all.
I think that precision is a very risky keyword.
I don't think it's going to be an issue. It never has been.
No, but, like, for that aspect of, like, no, I'm not going to attach my 100-point leader to this 100-point unit because you've got a bunch of precision that's just going to shoot them.
Yeah, and I worry about that aspect, and I still think it could have been implemented better. I think leading should have been properly attached at army building.
Absolutely.
People already, whether it was the intent of the designers or not, people build lists like that. No one builds a list going, I'm going to add these characters to the list, and then I can manipulate it at game start as I see fit because I may want my lethal hits character with my squad that already has lethal hits for some fucking reason.
Or maybe I just won't put them together in the squad. Oh, maybe.
Maybe I'll pay 100 points for a character who can get shot off the board.
Yeah, and it's like, well, yes, there is a small case that could be the right choice, but fuck off. We're trying to do simplified, not simple.
Exactly. That gets into the, fuck you, we're trying to simplify the game. Let's get rid of this. This is free real estate.
Yes, very much so.
Now, the leader attachment, pure upside here, less rerolls was one of the claims. And it's one that got taken out of context by people, including myself at one point. And after hearing the context again, I agree with it. And I think they did it right. So the point of less rerolls was less castles, less 14 characters in a buff aura providing reroll all hits, reroll all wounds, +1 to hit, +1 to wound, exploding 6s, mortals on 2s, getting rid of that by making leaders so you couldn't stack buffs on units easily. And I think wherever leaders were a success, again, flawed implementation, but pretty good. But in that like 90% of cases, this succeeded. And now it is pretty rare in an index to see rerolls. Obviously, there are the obvious ones of Space Marine's Army Rule, Eldar's Army Rule, Sister's Army Rule, where they do the lock dice thing. I count that sort of the same deal there.
Sure.
And you could argue Knight's Army Rule.
But the real thing is, like, even if there are some rerolls, it's not, like you said, like, reroll hits, reroll wounds, get plus to this, plus to that. It's like, if you're rerolling hits, that's what you're doing.
And when it happens, where it's the huge moment, reroll everything, Space Marine's ability, when it happens, that makes that matchup feel unique, which is a key bonus. Having your matchups feel unique. When I play against Space Marines, I'm like, oh shit, he rerolls everything. And then I go play against AdMech.
Oof.
I played AdMech in the Learning League. The patrons got to decide my army. They don't re-roll everything.
Nope. Which I actually think we're at a reasonable spot for that.
I think it's gone pretty well. When you look at it, like the Tyranid Index had very few re-rolls. Were there any natural you re-roll blank in your army list, Jen?
Old One Eye.
Old One Eye, and that's a perfect example. Named character who can only lead one type of unit, he provided it. That is a perfect example of how it was limited. It went from something everything had to feeling special on her Carnifexes. So I think that one went well. Shall we talk about the last elephant that I think everyone is thinking of?
Okay, so Battleshock.
Hang on, before we have our opinions, Jen, do you know what Battleshock is?
If your unit is battle shocked, they can't do actions for secondaries.
Sometimes. But yes, continue.
And nobody's ever battle shocked and it doesn't really do anything.
That's about right, yeah.
That's pretty much the answer. We had a couple legendary moments in my, we'll call it almost 20 games, where battle shocks mattered. And we all clapped. And we were so proud of little battle shock finally mattering.
Yeah.
Battle shock does not matter. I was real down on it when it got shown off. Then by the time we got to hot takes for the edition, I was like, you know, I'm seeing the word battle shocked a lot. I'm feeling like it's a real thing this time. It's not going to end up like morale. It'll be useful. And then I realized there's that fucking core stratagem that should not be in the game. And in any game where battle shock is about to matter, it's -1 CP.
Yeah, I think there is still potential for Battleshock. I think it has good intent and design ideas, but at the moment, it doesn't fucking matter.
No, battle shock should have been far more severe to pass, or should have been something you have to pass far more often.
And I think it should be the second one, because then, like, you can keep the core strat, but you have to decide, oh, I'm going to use that on this one because it actually matters the most.
I still think the core strat has to be gone either way for it to suddenly matter.
Probably, but it's tough to say that just because, like, if you constantly lose battle shock, it's going to be a feel bad. I get that, especially if you have no counterplay, you know? Like, if there's not the, oh, I can do this to stop it, other than, well, I just have to play better.
Yeah, it almost feels like when battle shock occurs, you as the opponent feel like you fucked up because it means you didn't finish off a unit correctly.
Kind of, yeah.
You screwed up your math and they stayed alive long enough to even have to take the test.
That is very true.
It's an awkward situation where units of 1 or 2 guys are very dangerous because they could still score points.
Yep.
Because you only need 1 dude alive to score that point. So then, okay, battle shock helps stop that. But it's still inconsistent for if it's going to happen or not, and neither player knows ahead of time. And then when you include the 1 CP any turn you want, say no, battle shock didn't happen, 1 to 2 unit guys are now incredibly dangerous at all times in the game. So you have to finish off everybody. When you finish off everybody, battle shock never happens.
And that is kind of why, like, I look at it and I go, yes, there is potential there. Battleshock makes some sense of like, yeah, I don't have to commit massive resources to killing the 1 or 2 leftovers. They aren't really a problem at the moment. They won't be able to score their whatever. I can focus on other things. But I mean, it's just, that's not how it plays.
Yeah, and poor armies that rely on Battleshock. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I think NID's made out the best of all of them. It's not great. Like, Jen, your army rule where you do Shadow in the Warp. Did it affect games much?
No, I don't think I used it in 2 of them because there was never a reason. So it was like, okay, that's cool.
I do think that you just value do it on turn 2 or 3 to hopefully spend a CP on your opponent's end, or God forbid, actually get them to not score 5 points.
I expect there could be more interesting army rule, special ability, whatever. It's just like, nah, that unit's Battleshock. No test, no CP, it's Battleshock. We'll come around next time and see if it happens again, but
I think that would be better, where you're not like, everybody has to roll and the odds of it happening are so low and it just never triggers anyway. Where you could just say like, hey, my Carnifexes can see you. Guess what? Sucks to be you. You know, like it just, I don't know, it just never did anything.
a lot of these we can get into much deeper.
And they can happen later in the edition, especially to give GW time to do the first round of data slates and point balances so that people can bitch about something other than, yes, we get it. Eldar is as broken as Admech and Drukhari were for 7 months. Get over it. It happens every fucking edition. I'm sick of hearing about it. We know they're broken. Stop playing competitive until they aren't.
Yeah, and we can also like understand what some potential visions of the codexes are, but
So, while we're on the topic of my least favorite stratagem in the game, let's talk about core stratagems.
I like them.
I don't.
Other than that one.
I don't like more than that.
Really?
Core stratagems are bloat. The half of them shouldn't exist. Okay, command reroll can stay. It's command reroll.
That's like 40K.
And when you get into broader war games, like I was listening to Hardcore History and he was bringing up the idea of random chance and good planning and and he brought up war games and mentioned that dice rolls are there to show random chance. The idea of spending a resource to alter dice rolls is your good planning attempting to alter random chance. I'm okay with command reroll for that wider usage. We could argue, like, I love when we get into missions. I love when you flip over the mission rule and it's command point and command reroll is 2 CP and you learn how rarely you should be using command reroll. It's a great level up moment for new players. But anyway.
And at the same time, on the flip side, it's like, oh, I can use command reroll a lot more when it's only 1.
Yeah, you don't have to get good at it. You can just spam it whenever you feel like.
I really like Overwatch now.
Overwatch, I like a lot. It is something that very early in the edition, when people didn't have many reps, and new people, whenever they join, are going to have the same experience of, oh my god, Overwatch feels so busted. And then like 10 minutes later, you're used to it and you play around it properly and you're like, never mind, it's fine. And I think we were immune to it because we played a bunch of boarding actions at the end of 9th. Because in boarding actions, you had Overwatch was an action you did because you had nothing you could shoot or whatever.
Yeah.
Action Overwatch, and then if anyone moved in range, you overwatched. It was really strong and interesting, and you learned to play around it immediately. This is the same way, where it's like, people are like, oh my god, they can do it in my movement phase, and it's like, stop sucking.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's how it works in like every video game edition of it.
It's literally how Overwatch functions everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't pretend this isn't how it works in every tactics and strategy game on the planet.
Yeah. And I also I agree, it's not something that's overtuned. Like there is play strategy involved of like, okay, do this instead. And so there are some flaws, like grenade being a core strat. I don't understand the fuck is that about.
Okay, let me do my rant here. Ready?
Yeah.
Command reroll can stay. Counteroffensive can stay, although it's interrupt. Just change it to fight interrupt so that I remember the name.
Get over it.
Epic challenge is awful and shouldn't exist. It is crusade fluff.
I agree, yes.
At the worst of times, it is going to be there so that you can beat up on a bad matchup where you have your Hive Tyrant epic challenges their poor little Necron who's leading a unit to poof him.
Good, fuck the Necron. Sorry, what?
But anyway, insane bravery, get the fuck out, delete this right now, get rid of it. Battleshock might matter before the end of the edition if we kill it now.
I think that there are armies that it could be useful in. Like, give it to Custodes. That's fine.
Do we really need to give them a toy right now?
No, but like, if you want this type of thing, it's like, okay, give it to an army.
Sure.
Fair.
Tank Shot. I feel like Tank Shock should have been in only a couple armies. It's very strong. It's very flashy. It definitely is the high impact thing they talked about.
I'm not sure about the balance and how it actually works together, but it hits the right spots for me of like, yeah, it's high impact and it's fucking cool.
Can we talk about the fact that it just mentions vehicle and not monster? And that's a problem throughout the whole edition, where vehicle and monster in 9th edition were the same thing, except for like poison darts.
It was the rare exception.
Outside of Drukhari poison, monster and vehicle is synonymous. They forgot that in 10th, and then people were bitching about, oh my god, this is technically a monster. It's annoying. All of my anti-vehicle doesn't work. And then it's like, the monster can't use Tank Shock. Why? Of anything that should be able to, the thing on fucking legs that have giant fists should be able to Tank Shock, not the boat. Anyway, Tank Shock, problems with it. It's very flashy. It's very fun. Iffy on if it should exist. Overwatch can stay. Rapid Ingress is crap. It should have been non-existent. It's very clearly, to me, something that was meant for the Space Marine range because they were bringing in Terminators and wanted to do this. And then they went, we can't give Space Marines twice as many stratagems as everybody else. We'll just move it to the core stratagem list and know that it's here for Terminators.
Right. I forgot what that one was. That one's the you get from reserves at the end of enemy movement.
It's somewhat strong. It has use case. It literally exists for Terminator equivalents.
I hadn't paid attention to it, and you're like, Terminator. I was like, oh.
You don't care because you're a fucking Grey Knight. Like...
Yeah, that's why I was like, I don't fucking know what the hell that does, but yeah, Terminator.
So, Rapid Ingress, the whole problem with that. Smokescreen, Grenade, same deal. These are the dumbest thing. Open up the Necron Index. Type Grenade and Control F. 0. Type Smokescreen and Control F. 0. Open up any Xenos that is not orcs who just steal Imperium equipment. 0.
It also doesn't make any sense. As playing orcs, I'm like, why am I using this core stratagem just called the grenade? This is dumb.
It's very clearly I've always bitched about the fact that Imperium players get 5 extra stat lines on their data sheets in 9th, where like every single Imperium unit has 16 grenades on it, up its ass because it's never modeled on the model. And it's like, no, it's got the super melta crack asshole grenade, all of that garbage. And it's like, get rid of that. That doesn't need to exist in the game. Go away, make it a special strat or something maybe. And then they went to do that and I went, well, I don't want it eating up my other special strat spot.
Exactly.
We'll throw it in the core list, knowing that only Imperium's ever going to fucking use this. Or randomly, like, I guess you can use it in certain Chaos armies, all the Marine ones, because they're just Marines.
Yeah, essentially they're just a reskin. But, I mean, as like a core strat, grenade, smokescreen, they should not be core strats.
No, it should have been locked to whoever was going to make use of it when it's thematic for them. Give it to certain types of guard in certain detachments. Give it to Iron Hands or somebody or whoever's going to tell me their favorite OC fanfic chapter is the one that uses grenades the most. I don't give a shit.
And if you really need it on something else, you can have that data sheet have an ability.
But that gets into do you want grenade to be that data sheet's ability?
Unlikely, but I'm just saying, like, if you've got this one option, it's like, well, okay.
Smokescreen's the one that double bothers me because it's almost always a war gear option to add smoke. And it's like, could you not just make the war gear option unlock the ability to spend a CP to get -1 to be hit, or stealth now is what it's called?
Yeah. I'm with you.
This is where my problem with core strats lie. So go to ground is an interesting problem of, I believe if you properly set up boards, it's useless, but it's there for people who are new and won't properly set up boards.
It's the like fail case of, oh,
we're playing on Planet Bowling Ball, spam go to ground to save the day.
Yeah, it's fine.
And Heroic Intervention...
It's Warhammer. It's hard to say take that away.
Sure, so it can stay. But like, we get my problem here is like half of these should be gone or should have been altered as a war gear thing or could probably go the way of the dodo.
That said, the other ones, I'm glad that they exist. I think Tank Shock is the kind of thing that like, it's got the cinematic ability. going on with it.
We had 7 core strats last edition. We have more this edition, and we killed half of last edition's core strats.
Yeah, it's just not.
We're moving the problem of 35 stratagems you have to look at towards here when most of them are fluffy garbage for the new Terminator model or for random Imperium army only. These are my problems. So anyway, it's not the worst thing in the world. It is a flaw. Something that I think was a win was the toughness change.
Yes, but I have concerns. I see it being extremely easy once we have 4 or 5 codexes out that the toughness increase has done nothing.
You're worried about the bloat. The inevitable power creep that occurred every edition when they swore this time it wasn't going to happen and then oops, it does.
We made numbers bigger. It doesn't have to happen quickly. Right now, it's nice that there is a more granular ability for toughness. So you can look at it and go, yeah, it's not a power suit, but just a little bit better, and it's an actual tank.
This is a good question for you, Jen, because you aren't really used to what it was like for toughness when you were playing against Votan and he had the land fortress. Or your Carnifexes even, I believe, have an increased toughness. Toughness used to cap at 8. The biggest thing in the game would have toughness 8. Guns did not change strength between editions for the most part, nor did melee weapons. There are exceptions, but basically everything was way easier to wound.
Yeah, in general.
But have you felt like things were properly tough or too tough, or you couldn't imagine them being any weaker if they tried?
There were some units that, like the Land Raider, felt pretty tough to wound. I think in part that might have been because it was like my second game, so I might have played that a little bit differently this time around. But I mean, in the end, I did just give up on the Land Raider and just wiped everything else out, so...
But, I mean, that's a good defense for toughness increasing mattering of, like, the big tank, you just said, fuck it, I'll deal with everything else.
Yeah, there's differences to make things tougher, and I think they mostly pull it off pretty well. I know there is some questions on if armies got the correct tools for the job to deal with higher toughnesses or not. Grey Knights is a prime example. I'm so sorry, guys.
Well, I mean, that's because they took away our psychic, so...
They took away your psychic at the same time as taking away your hammers, which was your anti-tank melee option.
The 2 things that we had that were like, they've got a tank, I'll either blow it up with spells or hit it with a big hammer, so...
I'm sorry, Grey Knights. I'm sorry. Sisters, I guess you gotta use miracle dice on your Melta shots to wound.
Yeah, and I mean, there are also some outliers on the other end that were like, you didn't get the memo that we toned down the amount of killing stuff, right? It's not perfect.
It wasn't perfect. I think it's a correct step.
Yes. I have concerns of it long-term staying or getting better.
But your problems with it are you don't want it falling backwards. They're not that this was the wrong direction.
No, this was the right direction. Let's not fuck it up.
I would warn there is a wrong direction with it. There's always the fine line. This is something you learn when you're dealing with players as a game designer. People will always say, ew, my stuff dies too easy. I don't like when my opponent removes my creatures, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
Classic. You know what they hate more until they find out that they hate it more?
Not being able to kill their opponent's shit.
Feeling like you can't do anything.
Yep.
That's the worst feeling. And that's what Grey Knight players are in the middle of right now, and other people too. And like,
some of the most miserable slogs. Actually, a good example on Magic is the miserable mid-range versus mid-range where the boards are just staring at each other. And you're like, nobody's doing fuck all. So cool. This is fun.
It's real fun when neither of us can remove each other's stuff.
Yeah.
That is a major concern if you were to go too far, and I don't think they did by any means. Again, outlier or 2 here or there, but that's a specific balance issue, not an issue with the change.
Yeah.
So the next few of these are all related. The new version of detachments, the change to army structure, the idea of indexes in general, the intent document, having digital rules that were free, rest in pieces. All of these are one big thing in my mind. They were all good. Now, we could do the argument of Arcs of Omen detachment system versus 10th edition army structure.
10th is easier to onboard for a new person.
Jen doesn't have to count how many heavy support slots she's eaten and can still build a normal balance list if she's not being gamey. You can build your thematic list without worrying that you screwed up because you didn't balance the correct keyword on a unit that you didn't know it had until 6 months after you bought it. I agree with those bonuses. At the same time, if you're trying to abuse the system, it is now easier.
And Arcs of Omen gave you that little bit of like that extra customization that
it was better than the rest of 9th, but it wasn't as freeform as 10th, but maybe it was good enough.
Yeah, I'm fine with what we're at right now. I expect it to gain in complexity a bit with codexes, but it's not going to go back to original 9th of like, hey, you're probably making an incorrect and invalid list as your first list.
Yeah, and that gets into, I guess, Jen, you haven't made many lists since you played the whole league on a single one. Do you even know the rules for how a list must be constructed in 10th, or do you just kind of have a good guess?
I know there has to be a warlord.
Okay, what else?
It has to be under the point limit that you've set.
That's about it, you're right. You can't have more than 3 of a single unit.
Oh.
Which wasn't a problem at 1K, like at all.
You can have up to 6 if it's battle line. I should rephrase that. So if your detachment gives battle line to a unit, you can have more of it. So you're capped at 6 of the Carnifexes because they can be in 2s, 1 Old One Eye because he's named, and then 3 of the Screamer Killer, which is a different data sheet than the normal Carnifex, but it doesn't go in pairs, so you only get 3 of it. And I'm talking about Index. I have no idea if it changed over the weekend.
So it is one of those, like, it's pretty easy to make a valid list just because the limits of what are valid are just simple comparatively. It's not one of these like, oh, I need to reference back to this is a heavy support unit. I get 1 of those and I can have, it's like, nah, don't fucking worry about it.
And then you could get gamey in certain armies, but not others, because it's like, hey, look, they've got a bunch of anti-tank options that are technically elite.
Yeah.
Whereas my army's stuck with them being in heavy support, so I'm capped. And yeah, there were issues in that system too.
So yeah, I mean the whole like detachment structure and how you get your detachment ability and that stuff, it's streamlined. It allows you to have kind of do what you want.
And can we just talk for a moment? Fuck Soup. I don't miss you. Rest in piss.
Yeah, it was always a fucking miserable thing because it was either not done right or it was easy to game. Fuck it all.
I hope Imperial Agents becomes a locked-in thing where you have to bring 2,000 points of idiots, and you can't just randomly soup in a 35.5 model unit, and we see that all over the place.
God damn how that made it.
The worst part is it's like, guys, you have to have overlap with the AOS team. They're right down the hall at worst if you're not them already. AOS has the joke of like a dead model that doesn't do anything is worth 70 points. If it exists. Because that's how many points it should cost to hold a point. Like, the worst thing in the game has to cost that much. And then whenever anything is under that, it's always like, oh, wow, that's really busted that you can hold a point for that little and that you can go do an action for that.
And it's like, oh, it kind of makes sense of, Grots or Nurglings, these like stupid little shitbags.
And Nurglings have OC 0.
Yeah, that makes sense. But that's a whole rant. Oh, boy. Does that whole soup thing stir feelings?
Let's just make it where Imperial Agents are stuck with Death Watch only, and they become the Imperium's forces of awfulness.
Well, apparently that was like something that they used to have.
Yes, that is apparently old lore from like 3rd edition and how it actually worked or whatever.
Yeah, and like the sisters got some things and it was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. But indexes, I mean, it's substantially better to have indexes than to be stuck with 9th and not have indexes.
And while we're here, detachment system, we're going to say, is a not judgeable. We haven't had detachments yet other than Space Marines. Indexes, they could have been done better. I appreciate they exist. I think some of the problems with 10th long term will spring from only having indexes, but having indexes was correct. And that's hard to explain.
It would be interesting in a year, the ones that don't have a codex get another detachment index update.
That's kind of my hope.
A second option because you don't have your codex yet, but for now, I'll take what I can get kind of thing. At least we're not stuck as Guard playing 8th edition for all of 9.
Yes. And At the same time, Drukhari is probably in a worse spot right now, and a couple others, where it's like, you have the worst possible detachment I could dream up. AdMech at least gets out of jail soon. They only have to last till like Christmas. But like, Drukhari is stuck there for forever. They're not on the schedule yet.
The actual like documentation was reasonably well put together, but
the indexes had good documentation for the most part. It was a little bit minimal for my taste, but I get the point of it. The core rules being free, fantastic, and required.
And the general layout was mostly good. There's definitely some things that I want to change.
And then the key one to me is the inclusion of the intent document, the designer's note document, whatever it was officially titled. That was fantastic. It cleared up a bunch of stuff. That should come with the rules whenever you do a rules update or addition or whatever.
And I think that is multi-purpose because, one, it helps clean up the as written versus intent arguments.
Yes, where now it is written.
But it also kind of helps show the player, like, hey, say your intent of something, you know, like, I'm going to be on this side of the wall.
Yes, that's actually a good one for Jen. Did you get used to talking about intent with your opponent while playing over TTS?
No, not really.
Okay, I just was wondering.
That's fair because I don't know of GW kind of saying that as like, oh, you should do this kind of thing.
To counter that, I actually believe it is now in the core rules of, there was a etiquette page that I think they have in the core rules. They mentioned a couple things, and one of them was make sure you and your opponent communicate and are clear about intentions, and make sure you agree on things, and then if you screw something up, that's okay. I'm like, that's nice to have there for new people.
That is nice. I probably just glanced over and I went, yeah, sure.
I know, you and I would have not really read that, but I vaguely remember that getting brought up in a comment.
And I mean, like, that kind of thing, and like the designers releasing an intent document, like, these are all things that like help remind new players once they've played enough that like, hey, this is just a nice thing that you can do once you have the time.
Yeah, we could get into the argument of an intent document shouldn't be necessary if the rules are proper, but like,
off. This is too complicated of a game to be perfect.
I feel like we use the term complicated wrong there. A lot of people like to talk about how complicated 40K is. I'm going to say it's too ethereal. It's too non-binary state, non-digital state, analog, not moving on a grid, moving on literally wherever you can get your tape measure to bend. The things like that add up in complexity over and over and over to make such weird states occur that you would need a Magic the Gathering style 5,000 page rule book of rules that no casual technically is aware of. They just know the ruling because they asked someone who knew.
Right. And I think, honestly, Warhammer 40K should not get to that point.
It can't with its current structure. That's a whole argument for you and I for a competitive episode.
Yeah, but like, it's just one of those, like, we have so many unique factions that play in different styles that to unify it would lose too much.
Yes, there's always the tension pulling. If you do that, you'll lose a certain beer and pretzels aspect, which is the actual target.
Yeah. And I mean, you brought up digitally available rules, and that was awesome. Should be still.
I will die on this hill. I will repeat it until this show goes off the air. All rules should be free to play your game. You should not hide the rules of how to play your game behind a paywall. It is psychotic. But anyway, the rules are going behind a paywall next week for Tyranids, so I hope your opponent isn't Tyranids, or you have to ask them if you can pretty please borrow their codex to prove they're not cheating.
Or, you know,
find one.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
So, kind of back to the actual game. This is one that I'm interested to hear, Jen, your opinion on, because both me and Brad we have preconceived notions on gaining CP and when you get it and how you have access to it. What are your thoughts on command point generation and use?
So you get one every command phase, and like I would throw out my secondaries and you can get one that way. Again, I really didn't use mine a whole lot other than rerolls and the couple of times I accidentally a stratagem. But I do know like my orc opponent could get one from his Gretchens.
Yeah.
And he never did. And he was like, yeah, this is how they work. I don't think I've ever gotten a CP from them, but
I've got it twice. I rolled hot.
So I usually had a lot of it because I wasn't using it. So
Did it ever feel like your opponents were always like starved for it kind of thing? Or did they make comments of like, oh, if I only had...
well, so most of my opponents were also new players.
That's true. Okay.
I actually don't think she played against an experienced player, which was good and bad. It's nice to have someone to help, but at least skill-wise, they were all pretty much on the exact same playing level.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So I do think some of my opponents used them more than I did for various strats, or I think some of their army strats they were using.
Yeah, the Votan players basically have to.
Yeah, so, but they never really said, oh, I wish I had more CP. Nobody ever said, oh, I wish I could do this, but I can't. I don't know if they were thinking that and they just didn't say it out loud, but...
Okay. It's interesting to get the new player's perspective on CP. So for us, command points, the every turn getting one happened, I think like it was before Arcs of Omen, right? It was the season before that? Or was it at Arcs of Omen? I feel like it was the one before. No, it was like a year before that, wasn't it?
It was before our...
Anyway, I'm a big fan of getting less at the start and getting one on both turns. Starting at 0, probably fine with how the addition works. I have problems with enhancements, which we'll get to in 20 seconds. But I think the CP generation, because of how enhancement works, is perfectly fine. We can get into the haves and the have-nots. Holy shit, Grey Knight players. How did they not FAQ that?
I just don't
It's insane.
It's criminal.
The only captain equivalent that is once per game.
Yeah. Ignoring the outliers.
It's in a good state overall.
Yeah. And I think that that's where I'm at as well. It is tough because like remembering back to, oh, you start with this much and it's a resource at list building and then you get it only on your turn. I like the way that you start at 0 and you get it every turn. It feels like that helps you can interact with your opponent.
If you have correct ways to interact with your opponent, which is still dependent on your index.
We're still missing a large part that we've talked about previously, but it at least feels like they thought about it and this could work.
Yes, this part of the equation is there.
Yeah, the enhancements.
All right, I fucking hate it.
I knew you'd hate it. Oh, dude, there was no way you were happy with that.
I despise it. I am literally the target audience for stacking relics and warlord traits. Characters are the coolest part of this game, making your guy, kitting out your sweet, cool, special dude, and having 4 enhancements to choose from, and if you have a certain codex, you get 1.5. If you have another one, you get 2.
Yeah.
It's shit. And then you're capped to 3 no matter what, which coming from early edition 9,000 Suns, we had so much fun when you would have like 4 to 5 of the things all the time because they were so fun. You play a bunch of characters, you kit them out with a bunch of special stuff, you make them all so unique and cool, and it makes up for the fact that you have 4 data sheets.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about the only 3 at the moment at least because we only have 4 and not everybody's 4 are actually useful. So that one, not a problem at the moment. I do agree that, like, you're absolutely right. We've lost out on some of the Hero Hammer building your character aspect.
Which some people will say, ew, I don't like Hero Hammer. Good for fucking you, go play Guard. If you don't want to play Hero Hammer, pick a different faction. If you're mad that my faction that has 4 models has specialty rules on all 4 of their unique models that are different variants of Man in Tin Can but blue, I don't know what to tell you.
I do think the current implementation of it is simpler. It's cleaner.
It definitely nails the simplicity.
There's definitely positive aspects of it, but I agree with you as well of like they've gone too far, essentially.
Yeah, and so we have other things to talk about here after this point, but this point is the last one on my list for a mega point for me. I was right in the hot takes about how this was going to play out. I said it is very likely this will be good for new players and probably good as a whole, but I am going to lose out because of this.
Yep.
I am the person who likes building crazy characters. See our entire series of episodes about building crazy cool characters. I am the person who likes playing a Hero Hammer army, who plays the army of wizards. I am the person who likes sitting there at work and thinking about a unique, interesting list all day. All of that is gone. It is too easy for me in my armies to build a list in 3 seconds. There's no real granularity for me. There's no special loadout that I can think of that takes more than 30 seconds seconds to think up. It's too small of a pool. I'm stuck in the kiddie pool of an index of 10th edition. It sucks for me. It's good as a whole for everybody in general, the masses, but I'm not happy.
I mean, you've basically nailed it, but I do think that they could loosen some of the restrictions and like give a bit more without it being overwhelming.
I don't even think they have to do that. The problem is everyone has to be treated equally to make this work.
Yeah.
I need the Space Marine treatment in order to not be bored and to go somewhere else to spend my money.
Yeah.
Thousand Suns needs to have triple the datasheet count so that I have enough options so that building a list takes longer than 30 seconds.
Right. And potentially there is design space for them to say Thousand Suns, for example. The codex basically says you have these extra enhancements. You can have 6 of them. You can double up on this one. You can, like, there's things that you can do.
That goes against the idea of 10th edition. I don't believe that for a second is the correct answer.
I don't think so either, but
I believe the correct answer is too expensive for GW to properly execute. It requires investment, which is something that they are light on outside of a couple range refreshes every 3 years that aren't Space Marines.
yeah.
And that's where we get into, like, you would have to update half of the armies in the game to get me happy again, where I could be properly in over my head thinking of lists.
Yeah.
Where I could not feel bored. Because it's the worst feeling when I'm putting together show notes for a future episode for an every factions list design thing with a challenge, and I solved it, and it takes more time for me to punch them into an app than it takes for me to think of them because it's too goddamn simple.
Yeah, it's tough.
But at the same time,
It's good for newer players. Like, I'm sure, Jen, you were not super confused about building a character and looking at enhancements.
you only had one enhancement, right?
So I have adaptive biology.
Was it super confusing to make that?
No, it's a box. You click the box.
Previously, building certain characters it really got to a point that I think new players got overwhelmed and hit this, like, there's too many options. I don't know what to do. I know that there's probably wrong answers and right answers, so I'm just going to do nothing.
I would say there was a different problem. Because everything cost 1 CP, they would write 14 relics and 10 warlord traits if you were Space Marines. If you were Necrons, you got 6 and 6, and they were all bad but 1. And then because they were all 1 CP, you would always choose the same one that was best, because you would never get to a point where you could now, okay, and I'll take the gun that's really bad, but it's pretty cute. I'll take it as my little add-on, because it would cost the same as taking the best possible option. So the change to points fixed that. And now it's just the question of their original statement of things not being as impressive as their stats are because you stacked the right relic and warlord trait. And that's the part I despise from that. Losing out on interesting characters. We had a fun series going on in 9th. I was so excited to continue it. We probably had 10 more characters I could have named off the top of my head that I wanted to talk about. We'll never get to do another one of those because I'm just going to tell you, take this character, add this one enhancement. Congratulations, you have found the Manipulus with the meme gun.
Yeah.
Also known as the only fun thing in the whole AdMech index.
All right, moving on from that. Do we want to talk about towering?
So overall, towering's fine.
I think I actually agree with you. Towering makes sense and seems right. They just fucked up the balancing because they didn't understand what it meant.
They didn't understand what Imperial Knights meant.
Yeah.
Chaos Knights were at a sub 50% win rate before eating a random fucking 100 points on all of their models.
Yeah, and then there was also like the
your poor fucking Gorkanaut or Morkanaut or whichever.
One of them.
Towering has not been the issue. It's the correct version of Titanic. The problem is competitive play, bad board layouts, including GW's ones
Yes.
at GTs, and how it interacts with Imperial Knights' godforsaken good rules.
Yeah, there are outliers that are problematic, that there are fixes to. The towering itself, I would say it's likely the expected play interaction.
It is the one that makes the most sense to casuals. Titanic was miserable.
It was unintuitive. You had to actually learn what it meant.
See that knight over there? Everything on the board can see that knight. That knight can see 3 feet in front of it and nothing else.
Yeah, and now it's like, okay.
See the corner of Magnus's wing over there? You can kill Magnus on turn 1. Fuck him.
Yeah, get him. So yeah, I think towering terrain is problematic at the moment with its current implementation. There are problems, but it's not towering. It's all the rest of it around towering.
And grading on the curve, I'll take the problems that towering currently has over how terrible every Titanic unit was in 9th edition.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring the mood up a bit before we kick the table again. Terrain rules. Are they perfect? God, no. But they're probably the best state they've ever been in.
They're pretty good, honestly.
So Jen, as the new person here, terrain and your rules interactions with terrain and the questions it caused when you guys were playing.
Why did they switch to a tank in their example pictures? It doesn't make any sense. You're trying to argue about the rules and then you switch to a tank, which is a single thing. That's not an example, that's a tank.
Eric isn't aware of this issue because he wasn't in all of those games. So all of the new people were trying to learn the new terrain rules. An issue that came up, the terrain rules are by model, not by unit, but it's really poorly written on the page with the Termagant picture in the rules examples where they show a unit of Termagant saying wholly within, not wholly within, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the tank one is a land raider halfway into, or a gladiator, one of the two, is halfway into a terrain piece and it's showing what it can shoot and what can shoot it.
Yeah.
Because it's one model, not wholly within, the tank in the example can be shot at but cannot shoot through the terrain.
Right.
And then it shows the Termagant picture as a clarification for where Wholly Within is on multi-model units, but does not remind you Wholly Within matters on a per-model basis for the firing rules, not on a per-unit basis.
So it doesn't show you, like, 2 of the Termagants are outside of it. The others are inside. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that actual issues, it's the best we've ever had. That clarification page is infinitely better than anything GW has ever made regarding terrain rules. It's still fucked up. Just a little, but it is.
Well, it doesn't cover the model by model case. It just shows you one model and you're like, okay, well, but that's not the situation I'm confused about. If half of my units are in the building and half of them are out of the building, who can shoot?
And who can be shot?
Yeah, like it's just...
From our perspective, Eric and I are like, this is great. It's so simple compared to before with dense, heavy, light. Oh, that one has heavy. Oh, that means you can prepare to get fucked over, but that means you get +1 to hit after you get charged and get murdered and all sorts of other weird crap. And it just became you've got +1 to save, capping at a 3 up against AP0.
There's still issues, but it's definitely in the right direction. And it's also not like they could have gone too far and been like, well, now all of the layouts are all the fucking same. There's nothing interesting. But there's still boards. There's still terrain. Like, it still does stuff. It matters.
Oh boy, does terrain ever matter. More than ever.
Fuck
for
off.
A certain problem.
God damn it.
Let's talk about the final major issue we have with this edition.
Fly. Has anybody at GW ever seen a fucking plane before?
Planes have invisible legs that walk along the ground and have to go over hills manually. Every time a plane goes over any sort of rough terrain, it shakes. That's what turbulence is, Eric. That's what the British believe.
Definitely.
Did they collaborate with Bethesda on this?
Yeah, and Bethesda made the aircraft and fly rules.
That makes so much sense. Okay.
Yeah, everything is on an invisible stick and is running along the ground secretly.
I hate it. I hate it so much. Why do we have hover?
Well, hover's the only way to make it work at all because airplanes are so bad without it. But that's a different problem about how did your orc airplane go?
Aircraft are unplayable. I did very poorly in all of the games.
Eric brought an orc airplane that does not have hover.
And was quite a few of my 1,000 points.
Aircraft are not in a good spot.
Oh, they're fucking terrible. They're so bad.
And that's before we get into fly in general.
And there's so many reasons aircraft are bad. But anything with fly on it may as well just not have fly.
Yeah, in many cases, it is better to ignore that you have fly, which is the wrong fucking answer. There are several board states using GW terrain where we tested them in my brother's basement, RIP basement, and we did a bunch of measurements, and the correct answer was to just walk around the fucking terrain instead of trying to use your fly.
Yep, that's wrong.
My demon prince should not be able to get there quicker by ignoring his wings.
Yeah, my helicopters shouldn't have problems.
It's much faster for a group of orcs to just push the helicopter along the ground.
You know what?
That might be lore accurate.
It
That might be
could
lore
lore
accurate.
accurate. Yeah, it could be. But goddamn, do I hate that Fly has these rules. Make up a some word. I don't give a shit, but don't call it fucking Fly.
For my middle ground was my mistaken belief before we got the rules clarification. Because before that, it was they showed the Fly thing and showed that you had to measure the tangent of the hypotenuse of the trigonometry equation to figure out what it took to get up to the second story with Fly instead of just ignore vertical movement, right?
Right.
Okay, that's annoying, but that would mean that to go over the building, I would have to do that up and then back down. Well, that would be stupid. There's no way I have to move 30 inches to move 10 inches forward because it's a GW building in front of me.
That would be stupid, wouldn't it?
It would be really fucking dumb. And they were like, don't worry, a rules thing is coming out to cover that case for you, to clear up all the confusion. And it was like, okay, good. This is about moving to a second story, and you ignore it when you're not trying to move to the second story and it works like 9th edition Fly. Nope. It takes 30 inches to move 10 inches forward because you chose to use a GW piece of terrain. It would only take you 12 inches to just move over slightly and walk around the outside of the building.
Yeah. And that is why Fly is dumb in 10th edition.
Fly is actually useless and is basically just a negative unless you are in infantry.
Yeah, sure. So the actual aircraft one isn't too bad because it's 20-inch plus.
They've got the infinite range.
So it's like you just have to move at least 20. Then you can go as far as you want. So it doesn't matter that you have to move 40 to move 12. Because you're just like, I can move 100, fuck it. But that's not really enough for the Fly issue because aircraft as they are suck.
Aircraft really don't have to have you have to come in on turn 2 anymore.
No, the move and then rotate 90?
Yeah, and the...
Cool, thanks. I guess I'm just going to leave the table next time unless I perfectly map things out and understand where my opponent's going to be every turn for the next 3 turns.
Yep, your opponent moves one little Gretchen in the way and suddenly you're stuck flying off the table for 2 turns.
Yep, and it's like, hey, that was fun. See you later, plane.
Yeah, so flying aircraft, absolutely bad. Just give me that middle ground where going past a building doesn't require me to fly 30 inches to get over it.
But we can end on the fun one, the happy, feel-good tactical secondaries.
And this is one where Jen unfortunately didn't get as much playtime with it. For the Learning League, to keep things simple, they chose at the beginning how the game would function of, for every round, you play Take and Hold.
Yeah.
They played that mission, they played Chilling Reign, so no bonus rule, and they always played on Dawn of War.
Yeah, the layout was Dawn of War, which is pretty simple.
So that was to keep things simple so that new players were playing the same game so that we could keep track of them. And they always played on the same table other than when things were screwed up.
It was the right decision for learning. It was also the right decision because changing stuff on tabletop is a pain. But there was some fun parts of the game that was missed.
It is an unfortunate thing that you missed out on. So when you played your first game against our buddy, you did play the normal way with the mission getting drawn and everything.
Yes.
And do you remember like what you guys drew and how it worked?
No, I think we played Take and Hold though.
Did you really?
I think we did. It was the same kind of thing.
Fucking nailed it then.
Because that was just randomly drawn.
I do like that it exists as a random option of like, hey, remember the old times? Hey, got it again.
I do remember you guys played Hammer and Anvil, and I think your bonus rule was the command reroll cost 2 CP one.
I do not remember at all.
I think that was the case because our buddy was having a level up moment about CP reroll and not wasting it.
Fair enough, yeah.
So the point is, the mission decks that you didn't get much play with is the best thing about 10th. Tempest of War was the factually objective correct way to play 9th edition. Tournaments should have been using it. It meant you couldn't build solved lists where you would automatically score max secondaries in every single game because you knew how to play Rod or R&D or whatever. You had to play based off what you drew. You had to play around the moment. You would get screwed over by RNG. You would have to play around it. You would have to know when to actually go for a different secondary or give up on one and try to get your primary.
It really was adapt your list that you brought to the experiences that are happening on the board instead of I'm going to build the list and my mission.
Yeah, because in 9th edition, when you knew how to play the game, it was very often you would reserve like 400 points in your list to automatically score max secondaries, and then you play the mission with the rest of your units.
Yep.
That was terrible. And that is why 9th edition competitive was boring as fuck.
And Tempest was amazing.
Tempest was the GOAT. And for those who don't know, Leviathan is Tempest of War. What you guys are all playing in 10th edition is the greatest way to play 40k. Pick tactical secondaries. Yes, fixed secondaries in certain armies is strictly better because it lets you automatically score max points, but that makes you a fucking coward.
It very much is one of those fixed secondaries can be right, especially if you've honestly, if you've built a list around certain things, you can still do that, but it's boring. And tactical secondaries just add that extra flavor, the extra flair to each game. That's like, okay, how do I accomplish this? This is going to be tough.
And games aren't 95 to 99 points.
Yeah, a decent number that like low scores because just fucking drew things that weren't going to happen.
And I really like it for 1,000-point games. And it's one of my boons for 1,000-point games is you can't score every secondary all the time. Fixed are really bad at 1,000 points because it's very likely your opponent blows up your 2 fixed farmers and then you're screwed.
It can be, yeah.
So I really like it for 1,000 points, another boon for that. But I just love everything about it. I love the extra rule cards. I love having variants in my missions so it's not all take and hold. Although I know that's all you got to see so far, Jen. It's very nice that they're trying the more AOS route of, hey, in round 3, you've got to kick the soccer ball.
I understand when you put together a competitive thing that you're like, okay, let's make everybody start at this fair position kind of thing. But
9th overdid it. It was played so safe. Everyone was playing the exact same game for 3 years.
The problem is that Warhammer is not balanced and fair.
Even at its best, it's never been balanced or fair.
So stop trying to force it, embrace it, and use it as a tool to increase the reason that the strategy aspect is existing, why it's fun. Force adaptation at the game.
There is a certain player type who does not like the idea of having to play around random bad luck. They're called spikes. I am one.
Yeah, but then you're playing a dice game.
But it is important that the game have friction against your want of a perfect no entropy system where you always win.
Yeah.
That is why the randomness is important. Not being able to build your list and go, I will automatically score 35 plus points on my secondaries in the worst case scenario. And tactical secondaries, once you learn to play them and you're both playing tactical, I was going through this with one of our more experienced players when we both got paired against each other in the Learning League. I was talking to him and explaining to him that, like, I am card counting right now. I know which secondaries you have drawn. We're on turn 3 of the secondaries you have left. If I move this to center and focus on this instead of my secondary, I can deny 2 possible secondaries you can draw, and I will score the victory points from holding center, and I will force you out of cover there. All of that combined is better than the 5 victory points I can get guaranteed by just hiding in the corner.
Yep.
He immediately drew both of those secondaries.
And that is something that, like, it's more important in turn 3.
It's things that you learn as you play it, that it is not random. I mean, it is random, but it is a sculpted set of possibilities you are playing with to maximize chances.
You can create your strategy around what the likely problems are going to be.
Yes, there is still that 4 spikes. It's still amazing fun for us.
It's one of those, okay, 2 out of the 4 options are going to be center-based. Okay, I'm going to bank on that 50% instead of 25% from the other 2 that are going to be different.
Or when you're looking at your own and you're like, I have not drawn Take Enemy Stronghold or Teleport Homers. I haven't drawn these yet. I know they're all in the pool and it's turn 3 about to be turn 4. I need to take that thing off his back point and start moving towards there with that extra unit.
Yeah, it can basically be like, okay, I need to start leaving my deployment zone. That's no longer a concern. If they want to go after it, fine, but I need to charge their deployment zone areas because that's where my missions are going to be.
Stuff like that is amazing fun if you're competitive, which is why the randomness is good and should be embraced.
Absolutely. And I wholly expect to do more podcast talking about tactical secondaries and this entire thing, because that's how I'm going to be playing.
Yeah, I think Leviathan's missions are the high point of the edition. They're my absolute favorite thing that has changed, because we were already kind of playing them with Tempest, but now that everyone is actually playing them, and I am seeing people who are also competitive going, damn, this is really fun. It's like, fantastic, we figured it out, we got there.
Yeah, we told you, it still is fun.
There's more to life than hold 1, hold 2, hold more, and doing rod.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap up real quick. 10th edition, final thoughts, judgment, epic music, go.
Overall, pretty good. Pretty happy with the changes. Happy with the intent and goals, with some potential worries about how that's going to play out in the next year or two, and really fucking annoyed by Psychic. But otherwise, I'm happy.
I like it so far. I've enjoyed my games that I've played.
No major hatred in anything.
No, I mean, there's been some things that have been frustrating, but partially it's learning.
You have at least 2 valid complaints, and they would be the leader attachment thing could use better implementation. It's a valid complaint. I'm not saying it's 100% objective, but it's going to be shared by us and the majority of people, I assume, at this point, that leaders could have been handled better with how they were structured. And your other one was very right when you were complaining the other night about the amount of downtime waiting on your opponent for everything, and then them waiting on you in both directions.
Those have been my 2 biggest kind of complaints.
And to be fair, leaders would have had a different complaint last edition with auras, and the turn issue would have existed either way. So, like, it's not a 10th edition screwed this up, it's a these are flaws that could still be improved upon.
Well, and I feel like the leader issue is really like, if I had my data sheets as physical cards, I could just put the 2 cards next to each other. But because I'm just using, like, the PDF and they're just printed out in the order.
It's still validly annoying. I find it annoying as well.
Like for the Carnifexes, like they have different weapons and stuff, so you can't just smush them into one data sheet because they are different. But it would be nice to have those 2 things together, because usually this one is affecting that one, and it would be nice while I'm still learning to have those together.
It really would be nice if GW, or I suppose somebody else, had a list builder that lets you customize these types of things so that you could get your end result of your list all together in a nice, here's what's useful.
You're joking right now, but as we record this, they still haven't remembered to turn it off yet, so I'm not going to be the one to tell them.
You just told them.
Oh, they don't fucking listen to this by now.
God, no, we've been slaying them for 2 hours straight. They're not going to want to hear this.
They stopped listening when we got to Psychic. The very latest. So, what do you got?
Okay, so for a final review, yes, I have complained a lot. There are things wrong in this edition, obviously. It's a pretty damn good edition, and I would be lying through my teeth if I said 9th edition didn't have more issues when it was out. Hey, how's your morale doing? Battleshock sucks, but it's not like it's out of nowhere. The word, like, it's probably still better than morale was. And people can complain about balance between indexes, which we're not getting into on this. But on that front, I will remind you, my Drukhari were broken in half for 7 months for 9th edition. AdMech was broken for equally as long. And they weren't the only problems with that edition. I'm just naming the first 2 that were at about, 6 months from now, time-wise, in the edition.
Yeah.
You're at the early stages. The fact that 2 or 3 of the indexes are super broken, it's not going to matter in 6 months. No one will remember it, and they'll be bitching about Chaos Space Marines is utterly broken. I can't believe it. How did they print this?
Yeah, I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
I can't wait for the YouTube comment when someone comes back here in vengeance in like 9 months. How fucking dare you? It was the worst Codex launch of all time. God fucking damn it.
Oh, it's going to be so fucking bad. But yeah, I mean, it was to be expected that like there's going to be some problems, but that's not specifically what we're talking. We're talking large scale ideas, concepts, implementations of 10th. And we got to remember, Brad, you bitch about everything, always, but that doesn't mean you actually hate and dislike what we have.
No, and that's a key thing for people who are new for some reason. If this is your first episode of us, I am pointing out the flaws. I'm still giving this like an 8 out of 10. Overall, they could have fucked up far, far, far more than is fucked up.
Yeah, if you really, truly hated it, we just wouldn't talk about it because it'd be like, well, fuck it.
Yeah, it's still a damn good edition. I will be playing a lot more of it. Give me back more Psychic stuff for everybody that's not Thousand Suns.
Don't take it away from Thousand Suns, though.
Just We need more psychic, not less.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice to get rid of some of the bad stratagems, specifically that Battleshock stratagem has to go. Things like that are fixable, though. I mean, the psychic one less, so we're kind of screwed for 3 years unless they go really far back on what they were planning.
Yeah.
What if they made a series of books to fix it and they called it Psychic Awakening?
I thought you were going to say White Dwarf, and I was going to get in my goddamn car and drive over and stab you.
You weren't going to get in your car, you lazy prick.
He was going to get to the top of the stairs and go, and then just go back.
And just send you an angry emoji.
All right, it's been 3 hours on our end of things. I hope it wasn't that long for all of you.
If it's somehow 4 hours.
What did Borrelio do? But let's get out of here for the week. Thank you for joining us, Jen. I hope everyone was validated on their own opinions of 10th if they had any built up, or feel like they got a decent overview of the state of it if they haven't played much yet. I'm aware for a lot of people 12 weeks isn't a long time to get to play some Warhammer. I recommend playing the edition. I think it's overall pretty good.
I absolutely look forward to hearing all the comments about why we're wrong about all of the Codex thoughts when they're actually revealed and all that. So.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that fiasco.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, please do the YouTube pleasantries. It helps a lot. If you're not on YouTube, maybe go to YouTube and do those when it launches. Thanks. But we gotta go thank the patrons in the outro and get out of here for the week.
Sounds good.